Paimon is an enigma. She has accompanied the traveler throughout the entirety of the main story and has passed herself off as one of Tevat's foremost guides. Despite this long standing relationship, we are no closer to figuring out who Paimon is or where she's from. However, what if I told you that Mona might have accidentally hinted at where Paimon might be from? Before we get into that, if you want to see more Genshin Impact content, do consider subscribing to the channel. To be clear, there are a ton of Paimon theories as she is likely one of, if not the biggest mystery in the story so far. Her rather unusual meeting with the Traveler and the fact that she looks like nothing else we've seen so far has caused a lot of speculation within the community as to her true identity and origins. So let's run down some of these theories as to who she might be. The first theory is that she is in fact a god from the abyss, or even a previously unknown archon. This idea largely stems from the fact that her name happens to be a rather well-known demon name within demonology. It follows the same patterns as those of the archons, who each have a demonic namesake. The idea that she might be a god of the abyss is due to the fact that Paimon the demon is known to have knowledge related to the abyss, specifically its entry point. These two similarities are why some speculate her origins and role is that of an archon. Another theory is that Paimon is actually the sustainer of heavenly principle, the god we see at the very beginning of the game. This idea largely came about from Paimon's appearance and how she met the traveler in the first place. The sustainer of the heavenly principles is the individual largely responsible for separating the traveler from their sibling. After several hundred years in stasis, the traveler awakens with the first person they meet being Paimon, who they rescue. The circumstances around this rescue itself is rather odd, as Paimon, who is always shown to be flying, is now somehow caught in the flow of a river, which is really unlikely to happen in the first place. In addition, some of her appearance, like the symbol on her head, looks somewhat similar to the abilities of the Heavenly Sustainer. The fact that we have not seen the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles, and even Nahida wasn't sure if she would appear while she was threatening the Doctor, further lends to this idea. Finally, we have another theory related to Paimon being a god, but not just any god, the god of time, Istaroth. So the idea behind this one is that Istaroth, for one reason or another, lost some of her powers and essentially became Gobafied into what we see now, which is Paimon. This would line up with Istaroth seemingly having disappeared, and why Paimon seemingly knows a lot about Tevat, considering Istaroth essentially helped build it as one of the primordial one's aspects. Paimon is also the only thing that can move when you open your menu, seemingly hinting that time has stopped for everyone else except for Paimon. There are other theories I haven't mentioned here, to avoid making this video too long, but some of the ideas that have been mentioned is that perhaps she is in fact a Seelie, or one of the Moon Sisters. Now, none of these theories have been conclusively proven, as each one of them have problems that get in the way of their viability, and this makes Paimon still a rather big unknown. However, Mona has said something within her voice lines that might bring us a little bit closer to unraveling the mystery. As most of you know, Mona is our resident astrology expert. Essentially, her abilities allow her to discern the fates of any person by interpreting their constellations on the night sky reflected upon water. While this might sound kinda nebulous and maybe even guesswork, Mona has on several occasions shown she is quite proficient at this. Many of Mona's voice lines about people in Tevat appear to speak about subjects that only the person themselves would know. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that Mona's predictions are reliable, at least as far as we know. Now, in one of her voice lines, she spoke about the traveler's fate and says that because they are not from this world, she is unable to provide any sort of prediction. She does go on to say that at the very least, she seems to be aware that the traveler's journey isn't over, but it's unclear if this was a prediction or just a guess on her part. Now, this seems to tie back to the idea that because the traveler is a descender, they likely do not have a fixed constellation for Mona to use for her predictions. The life of the traveler is also not recorded within the Irmensel, and thus information is largely absent for any sort of divination to take place. In a separate voice line, Mona also asked the traveler about Paimon, as for some reason, she cannot discern anything about Paimon at all. So it seems as though that Paimon may not even originate from Tevat itself. At least that's what this seems to imply. In fact, her words were that she couldn't gain any information on Paimon whatsoever. Now this could mean a few things. Firstly is that Paimon may not really be from Tevat, and she could perhaps even be the third descender or something. Alternatively, she might actually be able to hide these details from others and mask her true identity. There is a problem though, as we know that those who are external to Tevat do not have their memories recorded or are affected by alterations of the Irminsul. And Paimon seems to be affected by this based on what we see in 3.3, but she could largely just be lying. So with this extra piece of information, which of the previously mentioned theories is the more likely story? Well, most of the theories place Paimon as someone from Tevat itself, whether she is a forgotten Archon or an abyssal god. But there are two theories which still work under the assumption that she is not from Tevat. The first is that she is indeed Ishtaroth. We know that the god of time is an aspect of the primordial one, who came from outside of Tevat. It would also make sense for Ishtaroth to also be considered external in this way, and that's why Mona could not determine Paimon's fate. If we continue with this assumption that Paimon is external to Tevat, one other candidate fits the bill, which is the sustainer of heavenly principles, who has been mentioned to be a descender as well. Both of these scenarios are equally likely, with only her motive remaining unclear. Perhaps she is Ishtaroth and is guiding the traveler, or perhaps she is the sustainer of heavenly principles and manipulating him. It's really hard to say. Alternatively, what if instead of being a descender, Paimon isn't external at all, but instead is just masking the truth from Mona? Well, in this case, then we're back to square one, with no idea who she might be and why she would want to hide her identity in the first place. Whatever the case may be, the question of Paimon's true identity is not something that is likely to be answered anytime soon. There are a lot more areas to visit and gods to meet, and I suspect the truth is something that will only be revealed at the very end of the story. Perhaps Paimon really is just a nobody and a convenient character to act as the traveler's companion. Or maybe she is the key to the final antagonist of the story. That does it for this video though. If you enjoyed it, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. As usual, have a nice day.